I'm so delighted today to have a really special guest. I have Jamie Watts with me today. He's the Director of Education at Little River Montessori and also the author of Montessori for Grown-Ups, which just came out in 2025. So welcome, Jamie. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Rachel, for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So where is Little River Montessori?
We're in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yep.
Knoxville. I don't think I've ever been there. I think I've driven through a couple times. I've been to Pigeon Forge, and I think that's it.
It's at kind of the gateway to the Smokies.
Yeah, beautiful area.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I love to ask this question. It never gets old for me. How did you get into Montessori?
So I started out as a Montessori parent, like a lot of us do. You know, when my kids got to be old enough to for me to start thinking about them going to school, I had a lot of questions about, what I wanted their experience to be like. And I knew that I wanted them to have something different than I had gotten as a public school kid. I wanted them to have a lot of autonomy over their learning. I wanted them to feel like they were connected with the material. I wanted them to have a connection, like a high sense of, intrinsic motivation. I wanted them to love learning and to not lose that kind of critical spark of curiosity that I kind of saw so many people in my generation lose just, through their public schooling experience. So I think when, the time came, I think I Googled child-led learning or something like that.
Yeah.
And then a local Montessori school came up. They were smart enough to put maybe that in the keywords or whatever. And I had never heard of Montessori at that point. I wasn't sure if that was a race car or like a kind of pasta or what. Like I just had no idea. But I was intrigued, and so I set up a time to go and tour the school. And the school that my kids wound up going to, and that I ended up teaching at, had these wonderful one-way mirrors, and they were large, so you could stand behind the glass and watch the kids at work. And that first experience of going to see the classroom, I feel like almost every Montessori teacher or parent can tell you like the story of their first real observation, because it's so impactful. You watch these children moving around the classroom with such poise and purpose and calmness. And it's just so opposite of what we think of, most of us think of anyway, in terms of how children behave. Sometimes on tours, I like to tell parents, if you think about it as the opposite of Chuck E. Cheese, like this Chuck E. Cheese is on one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
This is the far other, end of that spectrum. So I was just intrigued. And I think, and of course I immediately wanted my kids to go there. And so I signed them up and enrolled them, and they started, and I really watched them blossom over the next few years. And some things in my life happened where I had to make a career change. I had been working in our family business. My father owned a Sylvan Learning Center, and this was in Chattanooga, and he passed away. And so our family decided to sell that business. And so I had to do something different. And I reached out to my kids' principal and asked if there were any positions. And she brought me on working aftercare to begin with. And then as an assistant in the early childhood classroom, and then got my training, and then was a lead, and then moved to elementary and got my lead there. And then I was going to move into middle school. And right about that time, one of my mentors, a lady in Knoxville that had a Montessori school, was retiring, and she was looking for somebody to buy her school, which I didn't know you could buy a school. Who buys a school, right? This is a thing. But I did, and that was in 2014.
Okay.
And so, now I've been at Little River since then. So,
wow,
that's my story.
I love it. Also, I think every school could benefit from a one-way mirror or two-way mirror, whatever they're called.
Right.
Because my son is in toddler right now, and you just can't observe the toddler classroom because they're just too excited to see you, and it's like a complete disaster.
The observer effect is really strong, for sure.
Yes, 100%. But I know, like when you I remember my now husband when he would come often to my classroom, and the way he puts it would be, I saw children doing things that I thought they had no business doing. And I think that's like so
Yeah.
true. He was just like, what is going on? Like, I would never give a kid a glass pitcher, anything that they're doing. He just couldn't believe that that's what
Or
was
that they would
happening.
want to.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
100%. That's such a good point. Such a good point. Well, I love that story. I love that you started as a parent. That's so awesome. It is so inspiring. Most Montessorians that I talk to, it is this gut, like, what is this? I have to know everything about it. So I totally understand. And I was the exact same way. So, what I really want to get into is this beautiful book that you wrote, Montessori for Grown-ups. One, I love the title because Maria Montessori said it's an aid to life, and that doesn't stop after like
That's right.
primary, elementary, adolescence, whatever. It's an aid to life.
Yeah.
And so relating the Montessori method to adulthood, I mean, I've always thought Montessori applies to so many different areas of our life, but the way you articulated it and laid it out almost like an album, I loved. I loved. So, what was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Wow, a lot of things. I think I think probably the biggest thing for me personally was observing the children, getting, even going back to that initial observation where you're watching the children work in the classroom and you
Mhm.
see the kind of purpose and poise and passion. Hey, alliteration, I didn't intend that.
Love
That
it.
they that they display. I think a lot of us that are in teaching and work around that for a long period of time, we we want that for ourselves. We want to remember that. We want to regain that. We want to see that part of our, heart kind of reopen, because adult life has a way of just kind of crushing that out of us. Dr. Montessori said we have lost that vital sensitivity that comes with childhood, and I think that so many of us really want to find ways that we can experience that again. And those of us who do have the privilege of working with children day in and day out have such an advantage there, because we do have this modeled for us. That kind of vulnerability that they bring to life, and the kind of curiosity and just wide-eyed wonder. And I feel like that's healing for us. It really, really is. And I got to think about all the people that I've known over the years that worked in Montessori, and just how amazing they are.
Yeah.
And it kind of struck me that they didn't really come to that work necessarily fully formed as these amazing people. The work of doing Montessori and being around Montessori year after year has had this kind of effect on them. It's normalized them. It's brought them back to that place of wonder and so anyway, yeah.
No, it's everything you're saying is so spot on. I remember I'm not in the classroom right now. I mean, I have a son at home, so it's, there's some semblance of a classroom here, kind of. But yeah, you had so much fun. Like, there's so many things you get to do that are so fun when you're in the classroom. And I miss that a lot. But I think, adults get in this, I'm generalizing, but in my experience, vacations are when you go have fun. It's not your day-to-day
Right.
life. Vacations are where you do, which
Yeah.
vacations should be fun. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but why is it only segmented to that long weekend or that
Yeah.
5 days off that you have from your corporate job or something?
So how do we make our environment a prepared environment that allows us to live, that kind of open-hearted, playful, fun, most alive self in the midst of all of our living? How do we weave
Exactly.
that in? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, it's somewhat easy to get stuck in the mundane and the routine of everything, especially when you maybe have a demanding job or a long commute or you're tired or, who knows what. I think it's that constant reminder of like, no, I want to live. I'm alive. Like, what can I do today? Like, I'm going to go. That's why I love having a young child and or being in the classroom, because kids, that's how they approach every single day. What's going to happen today? Everything is so exciting. Everything is so new. Such a good reminder. And that's something that I was constantly reminded of in this book. I'm in this state right now. I'm pregnant right now. And talk about,
Congratulations.
thank you. Talk about redundancy. Pregnancy, it's just the same thing. It's exciting, it's beautiful, but like, I'm tired. It's a lot. But I can still be a person, even if I'm not feeling my best. So it was a good reminder. There's many things that I love, but one thing I want to talk about first is it was in the beginning of the book, and it's when I kind of had to I took a pause and I was like, whoa, that's so profound. You're talking about self-compassion and love, and how young children don't question that they deserve love or that they are loved. They're reaching for us. They're constantly trying to get our attention. And your question was, when does that go away? Why, as adults, do we not think that we're worthy? And I thought that was so profound. And it kind of almost brought me to tears because it's sad if you think about it, because wow, so many of us don't think we're worthy of anything.
Yeah.
You know?
And they just operate so naturally in that, they don't question whether or not they can climb up in your lap or give you
Nope.
a hug, or whether or not their needs are valid in that moment, whether or not they can cry and express how they're feeling. They just know it.
They know
just
it.
come into the world knowing it.
I know. And I just thought that was so beautiful, and what a beautiful reminder of, I think sometimes social anxiety can get in the way. It's like, oh my gosh, did I talk too much at that dinner? Oh God, like, did I say the wrong thing? Or we've all had those kind of spirals. And where does that lack of confidence, where does that come from?
Where do they come? Yeah. And so it's obviously not inborn. It's not,
No,
it's not something we show up with.
no, we do not show up with self-doubt.
Yeah.
At all. Yeah, I love the comparison constantly that you make in this book of childhood to adulthood, because I think we all, even I have friends who've had pretty like traumatic upbringings and less than ideal situations, but there's always like really fun memories you remember about being a kid, kind of no matter what. You had this sense of freedom. And also, I grew up in the 90s, which was like a totally carefree time. It was great. The stacking on of responsibility and bills and money and jobs and everything, it's like, if you think about a cartoon character, it's like we're just being weighted down as adults. So what would you say to an adult who's feeling weighed down?
Yeah. I think you brought it up earlier, the idea of self-compassion, and I quote Kristen Neff, who's an amazing author, a lot in the book. And self-compassion is really key. Just knowing that you are someone who is worth having compassion for. We're very good at having compassion for other people.
Yes.
But we're not always great at giving it back to ourselves. And so I think that's a great place to start. It's just treating yourself with the same level of care and love that you would somebody else, a good friend. And it seems like a really simple thing, but it's so applicable and so impactful when you put it into practice.
Absolutely.
So I quote Kristen Neff a lot throughout the book because her work is really, really amazing.
Speaking of the quotes, I was like obsessed with all the references you brought up, specifically Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer with the misfit toys. That was probably my favorite because, one, I grew up watching that movie every single Christmas.
Yeah.
And you're right. We root for them. We want them to like be okay. And we totally do. So why is it not okay to root for the misfits in our world or to identify as one? There was another section of the book, which it reminded me of something my trainer said, when I was going through training, is like, elementary school children or younger children are just so like, I'm going to just be an astronaut, or, oh, I'm a musician, or, oh, I'm going to be a scientist. They're just like, I'm going to do it. That kind of, what's the right word? Just like no abandon. I'm going to do it. The confidence is what I kind of keep coming back to. Yes.
Yeah. Brene Brown talks about how fitting in is really the opposite of belonging.
Yes.
And about how, we really have to be able to come to the table with our whole self in order to to truly access that feeling of belonging and be in authentic relationship with people. And so that was the idea, behind the Misfit Toys, is that they all get to be completely themselves, and if they weren't allowed to be completely themselves, then they wouldn't really have the community that they
Right.
do.
Right. And you quote, I don't know who it was, but the quote that I am because we are, or something like that.
Ubuntu, yeah.
Loved that. And it's so, so true. To come with your whole self, which is a really, really vulnerable and hard thing to do. I used to be someone who would never be able to say, I don't know the answer to that. That would just scare the crap out of me. And
Yeah.
Montessori taught me that is okay. And that is something
Yeah.
I think I'm so thankful for. So I have a page flagged. Hold on. I'm just trying to see which chapter it's in. We're talking about, flow versus play, which I loved. That kind of,
Yeah.
that interesting comparison, because they seem pretty similar if you think about a 8-year-old in play or focus,
Yeah.
and then what flow means. Can you talk about the kind of the difference there?
So first of all, they're both very important. Play is kind of how we psychologically handle freedom. And so, if we didn't have play, freedom would be kind of this overwhelming thing for us, because we don't know. There's too much at stake. We don't have
Yeah.
play. Are we going to make a mistake? Are we going to, are we going to do this wrong and ever have everything, fall apart? So we have to kind of have this playful attitude to get started with things in life, and we see that in the children. How they will begin to explore an object, and kind of tinker with it and play with it, really, before they get into that state of flow. Now, once they've realized, okay, this is what this thing does, and I can really use this to construct something or build something in myself, then they will calm down and get into that state of flow,
Mm-hmm.
where mastery and purpose kind of takes over. But we really have to make room for both of them in the classroom. That's really important. So, and in our own lives.
Oh my gosh, it's so true, because I think throughout play, I mean, it can be many things. It can be like a release of the stress of your day. It can just be having fun. You could be subconsciously thinking about a lesson you learned earlier. And maybe that's when you're doing your thinking, when you're running around outside or something like that. I mean, I think there are, I'm a musician. So I think play and flow actually go pretty hand in hand with music, because it's so fun, but you have to be so focused at the same time. But then
Yeah.
there's sort of like this evolution, as you practice more, as you use that to your advantage, then you get in that flow state, which is also an enjoyable play state. I don't know.
Yeah.
They really bounce back and forth between each other.
Yeah. So kind of like you've got the time when you're, in a jam session,
Exactly.
and there's a lot of improvisation.
Yep.
And then you're definitely flowing in and out of flow and play in that instance. And I think I mentioned somewhere in the book, and I apologize, I can't tell you where, but it talks about they had done fMRI studies on musicians, and that they could tell
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
in real time, when they had gone in from play into flow, because it operates different parts of the brain, which is just, it's fascinating to me.
It's so cool. It's so
Yeah.
cool. One thing I love that you do as well, you kind of you give some pretty tactile and actionable advice to adults on how to maybe kind of like, there's a section where you talk about like maybe how to get into flow or things like that. Like you can, simplify your space. Make it a calming environment, keep an eye on the time, like, or like, set yourself up for success, like those sorts of things. So
Yeah.
I actually really appreciated that, because I think sometimes, I will speak personally as a Montessorian, I love to pontificate, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so great. But then I don't give, then sometimes I don't actually tell someone maybe an advice on how to do something, because I get caught up in the theory and I'm like, oh, it's just so great, and I think sometimes Montessori is so vast, is so huge. It applies to so many different things that it's hard to simplify. And I thought it was just so great how you were like, you kind of narrowed in some actionable ways that an adult could work on it,
Yeah, so Csikszentmihalyi did that, did that work for me. you know, he identified the elements that were necessary in an activity for flow to develop, and and he did his work independently of Dr. Montessori. They didn't collab. Um,
But it's
it just
so
so
relatable. It's
yeah.
it
But then
applies.
you look at the things that he suggested or said were the elements that were necessary, and they dovetail just perfectly with the Montessori
Mhm.
method and kind of environment that we've created for these children. So, and I think all of us Montessorians are just geeks about like
I know.
all the different ways that science continues to come up with new things
I know.
uh, to back up what she came up with 100 years ago. So
I know. We're like, we told you.
yeah,
Hello.
right.
Oh my goodness. All right, switching for a second. The concept of freedom and responsibility is huge in Montessori, as you know. I was an elementary guide, and elementary students have incredible sense of justice. So they want everything to be just as it should be, right? And so there's a great sense of responsibility in that as the guide to take all of their little quandaries seriously, but also kind of show them, how to deal with things like that, but then also giving them the freedom to think, the freedom, there it is such a deep, 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 deep concept. But I loved how you talked about freedom versus the will. I found that chapter fascinating. So I just want to talk a little bit about, I think sometimes Montessori can be seen kind of as a free for all. Oh, yeah, the kids, oh, yeah, it's chaos. I'm like, that is so backwards. But I can see how people get there because if you say, oh, yeah, the children choose what they want to work on, they have kind of unlimited time to work on it. It does sort of seem impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instilling that responsibility to the child of, well, you got to get, you need to. I used to like bring up state standards and things like that. Like there are things we have to know. So how are we going to do that? And giving them the power of their own education almost. I'll stop rambling. Anyway, just want to talk about freedom versus the will for a little bit.
Sure. So I think the Montessori method, I'm going to give a framework here. It's an instinct to culture model. So each of us has instincts that we are born with, and educative instincts in particular, curiosity, exploration, the need to tinker, etc. Those instincts are activated by our environment, by things in the environment that trigger those. And then once those are triggered, then what we have is an activity, and these cycles of activity that Dr. Montessori talked about. And these activities cause the environment to respond. There's a response. What we do has an effect on the environment, and so, like in a control of error sense, with the materials, there's a control of error that comes into play. That gives us feedback about what's going on. And then
Yes.
over time, this instinct to culture, or this instinct to kind of response cycle, creates a culture, a learning culture, and then that culture in turn works to stimulate instincts within the child. So it's a cycle. And any teacher, Montessori teacher, will tell you that the quickest way to normalize a child is to allow them access to a normalized classroom. And that's
Yeah.
that culture cycle kind of coming full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So in the midst of all of that, there is a lot of opportunity for the student to have autonomy, but there are checks and balances, natural checks and balances that come into play. For instance, the self-correcting materials.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a lot different a method or an idea than you have in your traditional setting where you're going to do this because it's time to do so and because we say so.
Right.
In Montessori, we're activating instincts that are already present within the child, and allowing them the materials and the freedom to act out those instincts in ways that they can learn directly from the environment. So it's this cycle, and it's a beautiful thing.
It sure is. Yeah. And I mean, I think also I remember I grew up in public school as well and always asking, why are we doing this? Why? Why? And I think in Montessori, yes, they are still asking why they're kids. But it's a little bit easier to answer that question because one, I'm going to think about it and then I'm going to, I'm going to have a discussion with them and maybe ask them why they think it is. I mean, I think it's just
There
a
you go.
completely
Yeah.
different experience.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
get that. That can be reflective because what we're doing has it has real world consequences and they can see
Mhm.
why it's relevant in the materials that they're handling.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I want to now I'm just moving through the book.
Sure.
Um, as with any, as I said before, I'm elementary AMI trained. And so my obsession with cosmic education is huge. And I just adore that you spend a lot of time talking about interconnectedness, cosmic education, and our cosmic task, which actually I think personally that resonated with me the most as an adult because I think interconnectedness, number one, I think as you age and get older, you're always kind of like, what is life all about? Um, what's my calling? What's my purpose? After I had my first son, I was like, gosh, what is my legacy? Like, what is he going to remember me about? I just really started to go crazy. Having kids just like totally changed my mind about so many different things. But I thought the cosmic task specifically, like, yeah, that I think that can really resonate with the adult population because I think so many adults and friends of mine, like, what am I doing? Do I really want to be at this job? Am I happy with in my marriage? I mean, there's so many what if questions that we start asking. So anyway, just want to talk about that. I don't have a
Yeah.
question. I'm just like, it was I thought it was amazing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what we are talking about at the very beginning of the segment about having permission to live, feeling that permission to do the thing that our heart calls us to do, that children just come into the world knowing.
Right.
So just, allowing ourselves to do those things that make us feel alive. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as to what we think a cosmic task ought to look like. How many species are we going to save from extinction, or
Right. Right.
right, or whatever. We have these kind of preconceived notions about what a cosmic task has to look like. But I think if we go drill down into the method, it really comes back to just doing what makes us feel alive and come alive. Because if it doesn't really matter what we do if we're a person who's living in that kind of dignity and resonance and presence.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if we're bagging groceries or we're pulling weeds or whatever. Like that's going to radiate and just be an amazing thing, an amazing witness to life to everybody that we meet. And so just leaning into that it doesn't, it can look like whatever it needs to look like.
It's so true. I mean, I remember one night, my husband had never done tie-dye. This is so dumb, but we tie-dyed a bunch of stuff and he's like, this is so fun. I'm like, I know. Sometimes it's just doing something with your hands, doing something that you wouldn't normally do. It's why I love gardening and cooking so much because it's creative. It's something fun. Like it's something that I can be really present at. So I think just sort of finding those hobbies, if it's not your full-time job, if, maybe finding an outlet on the side that can fulfill and help you, I think I feel grateful a lot of the time that I am a musician because that's such a perfect outlet to play and feel alive. But I think it can be anything, like you're saying. Like my sister recently got so into crochet. She's obsessed with crocheting. And she just said, she's like, I was just on my phone, like we can do sometimes. And she's like, it's perfect because it's a mindful thing. She's creating something and it makes her feel good. So what more do you want?
Yeah.
Nothing.
And
Nothing else.
those moments are magical, and those kind of things are really important, and we can't let go of them. I mean, there are things that we have to do to pay the bills, and
Sure.
there is the busyness of life, but I don't think we ever want to let go of those things that make life really worth living for us. And I think it's just as important eating or drinking or, you know,
Right.
yeah,
Well, those spiritual needs, as Maria Montessori talked about,
right.
those are
Yeah.
just as important as our physical needs because we need happiness to thrive.
And just this idea that somehow mysteriously doing what makes us come alive is this part is has this part in us participating with the unfolding of the universe.
Oh, I know. And
You
gives,
know,
gives me chills.
doesn't it though? Yeah, it's just
Yes.
this huge concept.
And it is, we
Um,
are all interconnected. I mean, uh, there is a reason that sometimes when you go to call someone, they say, "Oh my gosh, I was just thinking about you," or the reason
right?
you keep running into someone at the same place, or I'm sorry, like it's not a coincidence. Like we are all connected on this big old rock in space, like there's just a reason. And I think Montessori, it literally will like bring me to my knees sometimes when she talks about our cosmic task and cosmic education and specifically how our actions really affect others, and especially her whole notion of education for peace. It is what it's all about. It is the point. It is literally the point. And how incredible that, I wasn't a Montessori kid, but I'm so excited for my kid to be a Montessori kid, and your kids were Montessori kids. I mean, that's just such an amazing gift.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
It is. Oh my gosh. One last thing. Throughout the book, you had, I don't know if you want to call them vignettes or little stories at the beginning of each chapter, which I found, one, as Montessorians, we're storytellers. So I thought it made
Yeah,
perfect sense. I was like, this is
right.
perfect. What was the inspiration behind that?
It's kind of difficult to take these ideas that most of us see as for kids only and generalize them for adults without having some sense of story and seeing it kind of play out.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the idea.
I found
It
it
was
great.
really
I found it
necessary.
great, and I
Yeah,
found it
yeah,
really easy to understand. I mean, sometimes these concepts we're talking about are so abstract and so like,
right. They're mammoth.
whoa.
Yeah,
Yes. So it's nice to have just a story that is relatable or something you can kind of latch onto. Well, I really loved it. Thank you so much for contacting me and telling me about it. I have been telling everyone I know about it because I just
well,
thought
thank you.
it's just really beautifully written. So I just adored it. And you want to tell people where they can get it?
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, Montessori for
It's on
Grown-ups.
Amazon.
I will put the link and I'll share it on social media as well. But I just thought it was so well written, so thoughtful, and really important words. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about it today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. A lot of fun.